Welcome, traveler. Come in from the dusty road and rest your weary feet. The fire is burning down to soft, glowing embers, casting a warm, flickering light across the stone courtyard. You look like someone who has walked a long, difficult path today. I know that look well. I have walked many roads myself, though at my age my favorite journey is simply from the evening fire to my bed. The air is growing cool tonight, and the crickets have begun their rhythmic, soothing song out in the olive groves. Listen to the soft rustle of the wind through the fig leaves. It sounds like a deep, slow breath from the earth itself, breathing in the quiet peace of the evening, breathing out the heavy burdens of the day. Rest your head back against the cushions, and let the stillness of the desert night settle over you. I am a man who has seen many harvests, many seasons of gentle rain and golden baking sun. My name is not important, but my story is one you might find familiar. Tonight the stars are scattered like fine silver dust across the velvet sky. It reminds me of the words of the psalmist. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? It is a beautiful thought to fall asleep to, knowing that the one who placed those stars also knows the number of hairs on your head, even if, in my case, that number is getting smaller every year. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about my family, about my 2 sons, and about a love that simply refuses to let go. It is a story of wandering, of waiting, and of finally coming home. Close your eyes and imagine the rolling hills of my estate in the cool evening light. The smell of blooming jasmine and ancient cedar wood floats on the breeze, wrapping around you like a heavy, comforting blanket. I have 2 sons, both strong, both incredibly stubborn in their own beautiful ways. My older boy, he is like the earth itself, reliable, steady, rising with the dawn to tend the fields. If I asked him to count every blade of wheat in the valley, he would ask if I wanted them sorted by height. He is a good man, a righteous man, but sometimes he forgets how to simply sit and enjoy the warmth of the sunset. But my younger son, oh, my younger son, he has always been like the wind, restless, swirling, and always eager to see what lies just beyond the next mountain ridge. Even as a small child, he could never stay in one place for long. He was always chasing butterflies, climbing the tallest sycamore trees, and usually returning with scraped knees and a grin that could melt a glacier. I remember the day he came to me with that heavy request. The sun was sitting high and hot in the midday sky, baking the terracotta tiles of the roof until they shimmered in the heat. He found me in the shade of the great oak tree, shifting his weight from foot to foot, kicking at the loose dust the way he did when he was nervous. "Father," he said, looking everywhere but at my face, "give me the share of property that is coming to me." It was a heavy, breathless moment, asking for his inheritance while I still drew breath. It was his way of saying he could no longer wait for the future. He needed it now, even if it meant tearing our home and our hearts in two. A sudden chill passed through the warm afternoon air, right down into my bones. But love, true, deep love, does not hold on with a clenched fist when the beloved wishes to pull away. King Solomon wrote that a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but jealousy makes the bones rot. I knew I could not cage the wind without destroying it. I looked into his bright, restless eyes, and I simply nodded. I agreed to divide my property between them. It took a few days to gather the silver, to count the coins, feeling the heavy, cold weight of each piece slip through my calloused fingers. Every clinking coin sounded like a footstep, taking my boy further and further away from my door. I watched him pack his leather bags, smelling the rich scent of the dyed hides and the woven wool tunics he carefully folded inside. Not many days later, he gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. I stood by the old stone gate and watched him walk away. The dust rose in little golden clouds around his ankles, catching the warm light of the late afternoon sun. I stayed there until he was nothing but a tiny fading speck against the vast painted sky, until the road was empty and silent once again. And then the quiet, aching work of waiting began. Days turned into quiet weeks, and those weeks melted into slow, rhythmic months. Every evening, as the sun began to dip below the jagged purple hills, I would walk to the edge of the estate. I would stand on the highest stone ridge, feeling the evening wind pulling gently at the heavy fabric of my robes. I would look down that long, winding road, hoping, praying into the quiet, fading dusk. I would whisper the ancient words of the psalmist to myself. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning. Yes, more than watchmen for the morning. The estate continued to hum with life around me, of course. Sheep need shearing. The heavy vines need careful pruning, and my older son made sure not a single moment of daylight was wasted. He worked from the very first pale light of dawn until the crickets began their evening song. He would occasionally look up at me standing by the gate, and I could see the silent confusion in his eyes. "Father," he would say, his voice thick with dust and honest fatigue, "the southern fields need your attention tomorrow." I would nod, clapping a hand on his strong shoulder. But even as I listened, my eyes always drifted back to the empty, silent road. King Solomon was a wise man, though perhaps he had too much time on his hands in that grand palace to write quite so many proverbs. But he was entirely right when he said, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven." This was my season of waiting. It was a long, quiet winter of the soul. Even when the fierce summer sun was blazing directly overhead, I had to trust that the Lord's eyes were on my wandering boy. News traveled slowly across the vast desert sands, carried by wandering merchants smelling of myrrh and tired travelers covered in white road dust. They said he had squandered his property in reckless living. The heavy coins I had weighed so carefully had slipped through his restless fingers like dry river sand. I closed my eyes and imagined him, lost in a loud, crowded city, surrounded by people who did not know his heart. But a father's love does not diminish when a child makes terrible mistakes. It only grows more protective, more deeply yearning. And then the news grew much darker. A severe famine arose in that distant country. It was a terrible, merciless drought that stripped the fields bare and turned the rivers to cracked mud. He began to be in need, truly, desperately in need. Sometimes, my friend, the hardest part of love is simply keeping the lantern lit in the window. Sometimes love is standing at the gate and trusting the long, painful darkness to do its necessary work. He became so desperate that he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The boy who had worn tunics of fine, soft wool, who had smelled of sweet cedar and rich olive oil, was now knee-deep in thick, foul-smelling mud. The beautiful sounds of the flute and harp were replaced by the harsh, guttural grunting of swine. He sat in the filth, his clothes torn and stained, his stomach twisting into painful, tight knots. He was so incredibly hungry that he looked at the coarse, dry carob pods the pigs were eating, and his mouth actually watered. He would pick up those hard, bitter husks, turning them over in his dirty, trembling fingers. King Solomon once wrote, "A full soul loathes a honeycomb, but to a hungry soul every bitter thing is sweet." He reached for them, but no one gave him anything. Not a single living soul offered him a scrap of bread. But it is often in the deepest, darkest quiet that we finally hear the truth whispering to us. There, in the mud, surrounded by the stench of failure and the quiet grunts of the pigs, a gentle, warm light broke through the thick fog of his mind. The scriptures say that the Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves the crushed in spirit. He came to himself. It was not a sudden roar of thunder. It was simply a quiet, dawn-like awakening in his soul, like the first pale light of morning touching the edge of the mountains. He remembered the smell of the morning fires in our courtyard. He remembered the taste of roasted lamb, the warm, tearing crust of fresh bread, and the sound of my voice calling him to the table. He said to himself, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father. I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" He was willing to trade his sonship for survival, not knowing that a father's love cannot be bargained with. But he did the most important thing a lost man can do. He stood up. He left the mud and the pigs behind him and turned his face toward home. The journey back was long, much longer and far heavier than the journey away. When you are young and running toward a grand, shimmering illusion, the miles fly by like a bird riding on the wind. But when you are walking back with a heavy, broken heart and worn-out sandals, every single step is a quiet battle against the earth. The harsh desert sun beat down mercilessly on his stooped shoulders, baking the thick mud deep into the fibers of his torn tunic. He walked with a heavy limp now, his leather sandals completely worn through from the jagged rocks. His bare feet were bruised and bleeding, calloused by the sharp, unforgiving stones of the wilderness. But physical pain is a strange, shifting thing when your spirit is finally moving in the right direction. It becomes a quiet, steady reminder that you are still alive, that you are still putting one foot in front of the other. At night, the vast desert air turned biting and intensely cold. He would huddle under the meager shelter of a limestone overhang, pulling his thin, tattered garments tightly around his shivering frame. He would lie awake, looking up at the vast canopy of stars. He told me he would search for the constellation of Orion. And remember how I used to point it out to him from the warmth of our courtyard. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Those exact same stars were shining over our quiet estate, and over his cold, lonely patch of desert sand, a thin, silvery thread of light connecting him back to the place where he belonged. He practiced his speech over and over to the empty road, whispering the words until his throat was dry. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." Sometimes he would say it out loud, his voice cracking and hoarse, startling a sleepy lizard basking on a sun-warmed rock. As the long, weary days dragged on, the harsh landscape slowly began to soften. The barren sand dunes gave way to gentle rolling hills, carrying the faint, sweet scent of blooming almond trees. He recognized the familiar shape of a distant mountain peak he had seen every morning of his childhood. He stopped by a small, trickling stream to wash the thickest layers of dirt from his face. He looked at his reflection in the rippling water, seeing the hollow, sunken cheeks and the tired, aged eyes staring back at him. He took one last deep breath and stepped onto the final stretch of the road. I did not know he was on that road. Not exactly. but a father's heart has a strange, quiet way of knowing when the wind is about to change. That afternoon, the sky was a brilliant canvas of bruised purple and burning gold. I was at my usual post, standing by the low stone wall, looking down that long, dusty ribbon of road, just as I had done 1,000 times before. And then, my friend, I saw a movement. Just a speck at first, a tiny, shifting shadow against the deep orange glow of the distant horizon. But a father knows the shape of his own son, knows the precise, familiar angle of his shoulders, even when they are stooped and crushed by the weight of the world. My heart stopped dead in my chest. There was only me, and that broken figure on the horizon. A wave of deep, earth-shaking compassion crashed over me, so powerful that it physically took my breath away. I did not wait for him to reach the gate. I did not stand upon my dignity. I gathered the heavy fabric of my robes into my trembling hands, pulling them up above my knees. And I ran. The prophet Isaiah wrote that those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. In that moment, I felt the absolute truth of those words coursing through my veins. My leather sandals slapped hard against the packed earth, kicking up a golden cloud of dust behind me. The evening wind rushed past my ears, carrying away the years of quiet tears. When I finally reached him, I threw my arms around his neck, nearly knocking us both into the soft dirt. He fell to his knees, and I fell right down there in the dust beside him. He smelled of sweat, of the deep, foul stench of the pig pens, and of the stale, bitter road. But underneath it all, I smelled my beautiful, foolish boy. I kissed his dusty, tear-streaked face, kissing the dirt right off his hollow cheeks. Father. He wept, his voice cracking and small. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But I absolutely refused to let him finish. I took his thin, dirty face in both of my hands and looked deeply into his tired, hollow eyes, letting him see the fierce, unshakable joy burning brightly in mine. Bring quickly the best robe, I shouted, my voice thick with overwhelming joy. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his bruised, bleeding feet, and bring the fattened calf. Let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. We walked back up that hill together, my arm wrapped tightly around his thin, fragile shoulders. The courtyard was suddenly alive with joyous energy. Lanterns bloomed like warm, golden flowers in the deepening twilight. I brought him to the washing rooms. The servants brought deep copper basins filled with steaming water, floating with crushed mint leaves and green hyssop. The psalmist David pleaded, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." I watched the dark, muddy water run down the stone drains, carrying away the filth and shame of his wandering years. It is a profoundly beautiful thing to be washed clean. I draped the very best robe over his shivering shoulders, feeling the soft, heavy fabric settle around him like a promise of peace. The ring slid perfectly onto his hand. They strapped soft leather shoes onto his bruised feet. The broken beggar from the road was entirely gone. In his place stood my true son, clothed in the garments of deep, unearned grace. The musicians arrived, and soon every servant and neighbor was gathered around the roaring fire, laughing, tearing off generous pieces of warm bread. The fire crackled and popped, sending tiny glowing sparks dancing up into the cool night air like tiny short-lived stars. But as the night wore on, I noticed an empty seat. My older son was missing. He had been in the far field since dawn. As he drew near to the estate, he heard music and dancing. A servant boy told him breathlessly, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf." A deep wave of righteous anger surged up in his chest, hot and sharp and completely overwhelming. He wrapped it around himself like a thick, heavy cloak. He felt he had earned it, paid for it in full with years of silent sweat and unbending obedience. He was terribly angry, and he absolutely refused to go in. Word reached my ears at the table. My heart sank, a heavy, sorrowful stone dropping into the warm, joyful waters of the feast. I walked out into the cool shadows to find him. He was standing near the stone wall, his broad shoulders tense and rigid, staring into the empty darkness. I did not speak right away. Sometimes, the most profound thing a father can do is simply stand in the quiet dark with his hurting son. King Solomon once wrote, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." I knew I needed a very soft answer tonight. "Look," he said, his voice trembling. "These many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property, you killed the fattened calf for him." He had brought out the very worst of his brother's failures, dragging them into the moonlight and holding them up as a heavy shield against grace. He saw the world as a strict ledger, a tight accounting of debts owed and wages earned. I listened quietly until he had emptied all the bitter words from his heart, because the beautiful, scandalous truth of grace is that it cannot be defended by logic. It completely defies the rigid rules of fairness we cling to in the dark. I took hold of his rough, calloused hands. His fingers were stiff and cold, worn rough from years of grasping heavy plows and pulling stubborn weeds. I held them gently but firmly. "Son," I whispered, "you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." He had never needed a fattened calf to prove my love, because he had always had full, unrestricted access to the entire herd. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Love is patient, my weary friend. It does not force the heavy door open, it simply stands in the cold and gently knocks. Eventually, the rigid tension in his shoulders began to melt away. He let out a long, shuddering breath, like a tired ox finally dropping a wooden yoke. He took a slow, hesitant step toward the courtyard, and then another. We walked back toward the light together, side by side, moving slowly out of the cold shadows of his deep resentment. The younger brother looked up from the table, his dark eyes wide and uncertain. The older brother stopped and gave a small, slow, barely perceptible nod. It was not a grand embrace, just a quiet acknowledgement that the family was finally whole again. It was enough. It was more than enough. Now, the grand feast has finally quieted down. The heavy wooden tables have been cleared, and the music has drifted away into the deep night sky. The great fire has burned down to a soft, pulsing orange glow, casting long, peaceful shadows across the ground. It is time for you to rest now, my weary friend. Feel the deep, comforting blanket of peace settle over your tired shoulders. Let go of the restless wanderings of the day, the heavy, exhausting need to constantly prove your worth. You do not need to earn your place here by the fire. You are completely and utterly loved, simply because you are here. Listen to the soft, rhythmic sound of the night wind through the ancient olive groves. It moves through the silver leaves with a slow, sweeping sound, like the deep, steady breathing of the earth itself. The psalmist David wrote, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep, For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Think of those ancient words as you close your heavy eyes. Imagine yourself lying on a thick, soft mat of woven wool in a quiet room at the center of my house. The thick stone walls keep out the chill of the desert night, holding in the faint, sweet scent of cedar wood and dried lavender. Let the muscles in your tired feet completely relax. Let them sink heavily into the softness of the bed. Release the tension in your legs. You do not need to climb anymore tonight. Let your breathing slow down, matching the deep, steady rhythm of the sleeping house around you. The Apostle Peter tells us to cast all our anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Leave the heavy stones of tomorrow outside the gate where they belong. Let the relaxation travel up into your back. Let your broad shoulders completely drop. Tonight, you are just a child resting in the perfect safety of your Father's house. You do not have to earn your breath. You do not have to prove your worth to the silent night sky. Unclench your hands. Those hands have worked so hard. Let it all go. The universe is being held together by hands far larger than yours. And I assure you, they are entirely capable of keeping the stars in the sky without your assistance. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. Because he never slumbers, you are completely free to close your eyes. You can surrender entirely to the heavy, pulling tide of sleep, knowing that the watchman is already standing firmly at the gate. Let the tension melt from your neck, your jaw, the tiny muscles around your eyes. Let your face become completely soft and peaceful, washed clean of the tight, anxious expressions you wear for the noisy world. There is absolutely nothing left to figure out tonight. Out in the distant fields, the sheep have all gathered closely together for the night. They are resting securely in the warm stone fold, safely behind the heavy wooden gate. The Good Shepherd is sitting right there in the doorway, his long wooden staff resting quietly across his knees. He knows every single one of his sheep by name. You are one of that flock, completely known, entirely cherished, and fiercely protected. But tonight, you are already safely inside the fold. There is nowhere else you need to be. Both of my boys are fully asleep now, the older one resting from his long labor, and the younger one resting from his terrible wandering. King Solomon said, "When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be incredibly sweet. You are clothed in the very best robe, the heavy, solid gold ring of absolute acceptance resting on your relaxed hand. You are home, and the heavy iron latch has been firmly secured against the cold, wandering winds of the world outside." The prophet Micah asked, "Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over transgression? He will cast all our sins into the darkest depths of the sea." There is absolutely nothing left to carry tonight, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to fear. The prophet Jeremiah wrote, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. You will have entirely new grace for tomorrow. But right now, you only need the deep, silent grace of tonight. I will leave you now, my weary traveler, sitting quietly by the warm white ashes, keeping faithful watch while you drift away. May the ancient blessing of Moses rest upon your sleeping spirit. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you absolute, unending peace. Sleep now, a deep, restorative, completely unbroken sleep. Sleep safely under the heavy, woven blanket of unmerited grace, knowing you are washed completely clean, fully and unconditionally accepted and perfectly loved. You are safe. You are found. You are completely and forever home. Good night, my friend. Rest well in the deep, quiet, unshakable peace. Sleep, sleep, simply sleep.